Hi, welcome to this lecture looking at the right realist theory of crime and deviance. In this particular lecture, I'm only going to focus on their causes of crime, their explanations for why it actually happens. So, right realists, just like left realists actually, argue that crime is a real issue that damages communities. Okay, left realists also agree with that. However, they also make the link that it damages work ethic as well. And you can sort of see the elements of the new right there in that statement. In response to a rise in crime rate, right realists believe we need to adopt a tough approach, including strategies what are known as zero tolerance policing, where you don't tolerate low-level criminality in the hope that it prevents high-level criminality taking place. And their emphasis is very much on practical strategies to reduce crime, okay? So again, they also criticise the big theories like functionalism, Marxism, what have you, for saying that they don't come up with any realistic strategies to deal with crime. So they look for practical and realistic strategies to reduce crime. So right realists argue three key factors can explain the cause of crime. First one is individual biological differences. So that's very much to do with what's happening in the brain. Second one is inadequate socialization among the underclass, and that image up there arguably is what the underclass might look like if you're Charles Murray. And finally, they say the final explanation could be there's been a rational choice to offend. So I'm going to go through these three explanations with you now. So the biological difference argument comes mainly from some of the research by Herrnstein and Murray, and also Wilson and Herrnstein. So low intelligence is seen as a biological cause for crime. And we know this is considered true because in America, for example, they have a law that if someone does commit a crime and they are convicted as guilty, and it's a very serious crime, regardless of what they've done, they cannot be executed if their IQ is 70 or less, which is an intelligence test, if you like. And that clearly seems to suggest at a policy level, they've recognised that certain people will not be able to make a rational choice to offend or not because they won't have the mental capability to do so. So yeah, one of the biological causes of crime is low intelligence, according to right realists. The other theory from Wilson and Herrnstein is this biosocial theory of crime. The idea that certain people have certain personality traits that means that crime is far more likely to happen, okay? So they might be naturally more aggressive. They might have extreme levels of extroversion, be really extrovert and feel that they can get away with it. Risk-taking for the thrill of something, for example. And they could have low impulse control. So they might not think very rationally. They might think, I want it, I'm going to do it, I'm going to grab it without thinking through the consequences. And if you have some of these personality traits, ultimately, you can't really come up with policies or criminal policies to stop people acting criminally because of the way their sort of biological makeup in their brain, if you like, has been kind of constructed. They can't actually control some of these urges, particularly if they're, for example, naturally more aggressive. They're more likely to get into fights. So, of course, these can all lead to more crime. So risk-taking might involve things like vandalism, burglaries, for example. Like I said, aggressiveness can also lead to physical violence as well. Low impulse control might mean, I see it, I want it, I steal it. So these can all lead to crime. The inadequate socialization argument very much comes from the new right sociologist Charles Murray. Some of you might have come across him in the study of the sociology of the family, for example. So he is really critical of a group known as the underclass, okay? And he blames it very much on poor socialization. So this is a quote from Murray. The underclass are defined by their behaviour. Their homes are littered and unkempt. The men in the family are unable to hold down a job. Drunkenness is common. The children grew up ill-schooled and ill-behaved and contribute to a disproportionate share of juvenile delinquents. So he's making a direct connection between the home lives of this group, the underclass, and the number that turn to delinquency, if you like, a life of crime and deviance. In terms of what the underclass is, if you like, they are a group that don't work, according to Murray, and they kind of live off benefits. So if you like, they exist underneath the working class. It's quite an offensive term, okay? But, it's one that certainly you can use as it's Charles Murray's term. So let's go into his criticisms then about the inadequate socialisation. He said that the UK and the USA have too many dependent on the state, which means they're relying on benefits. And one of the problems with this benefit culture is that it develops a sense or a culture of immediate gratification for very little work. So benefits mostly are paid or were paid weekly, although with the universal credit system in the UK, we have shifted towards a monthly payment system. But yes, most benefits are paid weekly, which meant that people on benefits were getting used to, at the end of each week, getting a benefit check, and they weren't having to work for those benefits. And Charles Murray argued that this was therefore creating this immediate gratification culture. They weren't getting used to the idea of, I need to work hard for a month and then get paid, and that's my reward. And they weren't even learning that they had to work in order to get paid. So it really flies in the face, if you like, of the idea of meritocracy, that you'll be rewarded for your work. So issues with the underclass were the growth of lone parent families, and Murray was critical of this, saying that this led to far less family stability. He argued that there was no incentive to work in the underclass and to support families, partially because of the benefit culture, but also because young people were being raised in lone parent families, mainly headed by women. So young boys who were growing up into young men weren't seeing father figures around. So when they had kids, they didn't feel that they had to be around to support their families, which really meant that there was a lack of good role models in families, particularly for boys. And this was really problematic in areas of significant deprivation, where they perhaps had third or even fourth generation unemployment. So the grandparents had never worked, the parents had never worked, and then the child themselves, when they kind of were old enough to work, didn't work. So there was no role model to look to and think, oh, you have to work in order to earn. Instead, might have families or neighbourhoods that had most people on benefits rather than working. And Murray said this was a real problem and led to criminality. So he argued that the best agency of socialisation, the best solution to all these problems is a nuclear family. So a husband and a wife with their kids. And he pointed to the huge increase of crime on council estates and inner city areas when perhaps compared to more suburban middle class areas. And he blamed this on lone parent families, predominantly headed by young women because of absent fathers. So arguably this all could encourage crime from a Charles Murray's perspective. And when you kind of think about why that might be, if there is a lack of male role model in the home, where do you think, particularly young boys or young teens, if they haven't got the male role model at home, where might they turn to get that male role model figure? And I would say, according to Murray, it's not the education system. Where might they seek out those male role models, and how might that lead to increased crime? In terms of other reasons why this might lead to more criminality, is if it's a lone parent family with one parent, it's going to be much more difficult to supervise the children at all times, particularly if that parent has to work or isn't around all the time. Then as a result, those children aren't getting that level of informal social control. They might be out in the streets getting involved in low-level deviance, which could eventually escalate to much higher level deviance and crime. So the final cause, if you like, of crime, according to the right realists, is this idea of rational choice, which I'm going to talk to you about in a bit more detail now. So rational choice theory emerged from something known as control theory. So right realists argue that crime is the result of a culture that emphasizes values like immediate gratification and low self-control. So you can see elements of Charles Murray's ideas there. So if you grow up in a culture like that and you're used to getting rewarded straight away and you haven't got much self-control, perhaps crime might seem like more socially acceptable or a more normal way in order to achieve the things that you want. However, this is particularly problematic when informal social control is weak, when there are less or there are much weaker social bonds and the potential criminals have very little to lose. And this is what control theory is all about, the idea that we all need to be subject to a level of social control. And if we don't have that social control, then what have we got to lose? So what is it really that stops people committing crimes when you look at control theory? Well, the main thing is like we're worried about perhaps losing relationships with people that we know, or I might be worried about losing my job or losing my status in my community. So yeah, okay, if I committed a crime, I'd be very worried about going to jail and losing my freedom. But I'd also be like, oh God, I would never be able to teach again because I have a criminal record. It's quite likely that my friends would be really disappointed. They might not want to be friends with me anymore. I might lose my relationship with my family because they wouldn't be able to accept that I'd committed a crime. And I'd certainly lose my status. I would not, people in my community would be aware that I'd committed a crime. I would be cast out. I would be stigmatized. I wouldn't have a sense of belonging. I would lose quite a lot of my, if you like, my social connections. Okay. So the fear of losing all those things generally will prevent someone from committing a crime, as well, of course, the fear of going to jail. Okay. But then the opposite end of this is, well, what sorts of people then are more or less likely, therefore, to commit crime? And control theory argues that if individuals are tied into, if they have a real stake in their community, they will limit the likelihood to commit deviant acts because they don't want to lose all of that social capital, all of their connections. The issue is those that aren't very well connected to the local area, haven't perhaps got, established families, haven't perhaps got careers going which they want to make progress through, then they are far more likely to commit crime because they haven't got those things to lose. And you've got to think about, well, what groups and what people, communities don't have that level of social control. And when you think about it, it is what Murray was talking about in terms of the underclass, because many of them don't have jobs to lose. It's perhaps younger people because they are less likely to have family commitments or relationships. Very much people from deprived groups and disadvantaged areas because they perhaps haven't got much status in the community anyway. So those groups then are far more likely to commit crime because they haven't got much to lose. And this has led to the emergence of what we know as rational choice theory, which I'm going to talk to you about now. So Ron Clarke is the main proponent of rational choice theory, although it appears in several different approaches across different subjects. And he argued that the decision to commit crime is based on a rational calculation or a reasoned choice about the consequences of perhaps committing a certain act. So anyone who's perhaps thinking about a crime, whether that might be, let's think about stealing a phone, for example, they will have to go through a consequence versus reward balance. So the consequence might be, if I get caught with that phone, I will be arrested. Versus the reward might be, that phone's worth £1,000. So, or if I get arrested, I might get a criminal record, but I'll end up with this. I might get the reward of £1,000, for example. Okay, but obviously the other thing to take into account is what is the actual chance of getting caught, because I'm only going to suffer the consequence of getting a criminal record if I get caught. So, say the phone has been left on a table in a dark club or a bar. Remember when we used to be able to go to those, and no one's around to see it, there's no CCTV. I know that my chance of getting caught is really, really low, so therefore there is hardly going to be any consequences. So I know I'm just going to end up with a £1,000 phone. That is a rational choice to offend. Okay? And Wilson, who we'll be talking about in more detail when we look at broken windows theory, Wilson argued, if the supply and value of legitimate opportunities, like jobs, was declining at the very same time that the cost of illegitimate opportunities, e.g. fines and jail terms, was also declining, a rational teenager might well conclude that it makes more sense to steal cars than to wash them. So if you want, pause this lecture at this point and just have a think about what he's saying, okay? So imagine if you are a teenager who, maybe you are washing cars, trying to earn some money, but maybe you're looking at the fact that, well, hang on, no one's being arrested. The police aren't investigating car theft anymore. Oh, there's no chance of me getting caught. Then actually my reward of stealing a car is much higher than the amount of money I'm going to earn over several weeks washing the cars. So that's like the rational choice to offend if the legitimate opportunities to make the money are declining. So can you think of any crimes that have increased mainly because the consequences are really low, like the punishments aren't really there, or when the chances of getting caught are low? So can you think of any crimes that have increased? Are you aware of crimes, or maybe you've even experienced a crime that you think maybe took place purely because whoever committed that crime made a rational choice to offend because they didn't think they're going to get caught, or the consequences are really, really low? And if you can't think of any, have a quick Google of something like what crimes police are no longer investigating in the UK. And I will let you know that one of those crimes, for example, is car vandalism and car theft. Okay? Purely because they have argued that the chance of catching the perpetrators is really low. So as a result, if you were someone who was thinking about perhaps stealing a car and you knew they weren't really investigating it, maybe you'd start to make that choice that, if I'm going to get away with this, I will just warn you that, stealing a car is a really serious crime. Don't go and do that. So this is where we're going to go to in the next lecture. I'm going to talk to you about the right realist solutions to the crime. And clearly biological differences and inadequate socialisation, you can't really create policy to deal with those two issues without really interfering with the family life. And new right sociologists are not a fan of the state interfering in family life to that level. But the rational choice theory, that does give us some really good practical solutions to make crime less attractive. It's just all about that consequences versus rewards balance. So what can you do to make individuals who are thinking about crime think, oh, no way, the consequences for that are so serious. So, for example, back in the day, at the end of the 1800s, you might have been perhaps hung or executed for theft, for example, perhaps earlier than the 1800s. And that's quite a serious consequence. So you perhaps wouldn't have done it. We no longer have those levels of punishments. So, maybe that's something we should look at. Not bringing back that type of punishment, but do we need to increase the consequences for certain offences so people don't make a rational choice to offend? So right realist solutions really focus on control, containment and punishment, okay? They're not very interested in the causes of offending. They're not interested in, things like poverty. They're not interested in why a person's been put in a situation where they feel they have no choice but to commit crime. And they're not really that concerned with rehabilitating offenders either, okay? They want to stop people ever making the choice to commit a crime. So as a result, their policies are very much about reducing the rewards from crime and increasing the cost of crime to the offender. So prison sentences have gotten much harsher where this has been applied, and punishments happen really quickly after offending. So there are three strategies that we're going to be looking in the next lecture. The first one is broken windows theory. Second one is something known as zero tolerance policing, and quite often broken windows and zero tolerance are used together. And the final one is something known as situational crime prevention, and that includes a strategy known as target hardening, which are right realist solutions to crime. So thanks very much for listening, I'll